clear, as I have done already and will always do, that I personally stand in full, unflinching solidarity with my friends and comrades in Palestine Action, as I do with the people of Palestine. I'll never abandon it. Acknowledge the fact that Zionism is in crisis, right? It's increasingly viewed as a fascist ideology, and for a number of reasons that I don't necessarily need to enumerate here, it seems as though the apartheid experiment is collapsing, but it's like a kind of wounded dog that's lashing out, and it's engaged in the mass murder of Palestinians, right? And I know there's a risk that we've sort of become numb to that, but it's obviously happening right now as we speak, the mass murder of Palestinians because they're not Jewish. And that is what's so inspiring about the people in Palestine Action, is because having spoken to a lot of them, they understand, we understand that Zionism will be defeated on the battlefield. We all saw those Iranian ballistic missiles slamming into Tel Aviv and Haifa. Like, this is doing fundamental, irreparable damage to the Zionist entity, and that is where it will be defeated. But that raises a profound strategic question for us in the diaspora, people who are not in Palestine themselves. How do we most materially contribute to a struggle which we accept will ultimately be won on the ground in Palestine? And that's what's so inspiring about Palestine Action, is that they have found this incredibly effective way of dealing a blow to the Zionist entity. A bit of history and context to this idea of prescribing people and prescribing groups. We can't understand it without understanding the British colonial occupation of Ireland. That's where that technique was pioneered. And I think we learned something, I'm not trying to overstate it, but we learned something from looking to the history of the British imperial attempt to stifle the Irish Republican struggle, just as we do. We learned something about the war on terror, so-called, and the British Empire's current attempts to engage in mass murder of Muslim countries in the Middle East. Right, those two projects are related in interesting ways. Okay, so where I come from South Armagh in the occupied north of Ireland, and when I was a kid, there were helicopters flying overhead because the British Army was too scared to put Land Rovers because the IRA would blow them up. All right, it was the beating heart of Irish republicanism. The British Empire was terrified of it. British soldiers were terrified to be deployed to South Armagh, where I came from. All right, and where I come from, people love the IRA and we love Irish republicanism. And if you look at the lampposts where I grew up, they have IRA written all over them. And I was recently in the Free City of Derry, very similar energy, right? They turned all of the street signs into the upside down triangles have all been painted red, and they have resist on them, all right? So I think there's something happening now. Like, there's a common sense in Ireland that is somewhat different to the common sense in Britain, but we can learn something from it, right? Like, the reason that all of that graffiti, all of these symbols of Irish resistance and Irish struggle against colonialism, all of this solidarity with Palestine is allowed to continue in those communities is because those communities are too powerful for the British state to interfere. If you go to the Bogside in Derry, there's victories of the PFLP written everywhere. It's like the British state is not powerful enough to suppress it. And I think we're getting to that point with Palestine Action. It's kind of like within Britain, there is a pro-Palestinian movement that it's too powerful for the British state to contain. It's struggling to contain it, right? And I think we see that in three ways. A lot of us will remember one of the big Palestine marches that happened around about Remembrance Day, and Suella Braverman tried to suggest, dog whistling to the far right, that we were somehow trying to interfere with the South half in Remembrance or whatever. And she tried to say this march needs to be banned. Mm-hmm. And the sort of more liberal bit of the British state in the form of the Metropolitan Police, of which I'm no fan, said we can't really ban the march, there's no real basis for that. But I remember this phenomenon where it felt as though we were being told by this proto-fascist British government minister, you're not allowed to march. And it was the biggest march that we had seen, right? It was close to 1 million people, I think. I was on that march, it was insane. It was close to Iraq War levels of people on the street. So there's a phenomenon happening there, right? Think about what happens. The British state tries to say, you cannot do this. And the British people say, or people in Britain say, you and whose army, there's too many of us, right? And I've spoken to comrades in Berlin where the marches are much smaller, and they say to us, like, how do you put so many people on the street, right? Now, I'm not here to uncritically endorse marching as a theory of change. I have much more affinity with the comrades in Palestine Action and their suggestion that we directly confront it, but I'm saying we learned something there about the British state and its overreach, right? That was an example of the previous Tory administration trying to say, you can't do this, and people saying, you're not powerful enough to stop us, right? So that's example one. Second example is Liam Oak from Kneecap. So I followed that very closely. I'm a lawyer. I was very interested in how that stuff panned out. These sniveling little Cola manager types in campaign against anti-Semitism. I think it was some dweeb from them who posted the video, and that we all saw the video. Like, your man is running around in a flag that is alleged to be a flag of a certain prescribed organization, and we all heard what he shouted into the microphone. You know, you make up your own mind about what he said. But that video did the rounds, and then they sort of put out this apology. I don't know why they did that. Maybe they got some advice, like they should kind of try and softly or whatever. They put out the apology, and then the British state made this, in my opinion, astonishing decision to charge them, right? And think about what's happening now. You've got the full code test for Crown prosecutors, which is the test that a police officer or a CPS person has to apply before making a decision to charge, and has two limbs. Are you likely to get a conviction? Make up your own mind about the merits of the charge against Liam. And is it in the public interest? And it's astonishing to me that an administrator of the British Empire thought it was a good idea to turn that guy into a folk hero. He is now like Robin Hood end levels of just heroic. Like he will forever be the guy who did this incredibly cool shit in the middle of a genocide. And as a comrade of mine in Palestine Action put it, who will remain nameless, he said, you know, we didn't expect to get it, but now thanks to this charging decision, we have like pro-IRA Beatles or whatever. Like, I was outside that Crown Court and there was just thousands of people, right? So that's the second example of like the British state trying to be like, you cannot do this, and everyone be like, we think it's cool AF actually. We're like, you can't stop us. Like, we love this. We love these guys, and they just did Glastonbury and the Guardian just gave them a 5-star review. It's like they keep trying to suppress dissent, and everyone's like, but it's cool and everyone loves it. Like, what are you? And then you saw that they tried to be like, the BBC was like, no, don't show kneecap, and they were like, just show someone else, and then the someone else is shouting death to the idea. The more they try and smash it, the more it just grows. Like this is why I say Zionism is in a terminal crisis, but it's coming back to the British Empire that sort of sponsored the little loyal Jewish loss in the first place, and now more importantly the US, right? They've lost control completely, and so they're lashing out in these wild, stupid, unstrategic ways. We're winning, right? Not without a horrific cost to the Palestinians, but we are winning, right? Third example, and this is the most serious example, right? Very rough and ready history of the Irish struggle, right? But broadly, obviously the Brits were sort of, it was a classic kind of October 7th moment, like 1916, right? Military failure, but it leads to the establishment of an Irish Republic, right? But 6 counties remain occupied, obviously, and it's relatively peaceful, but Catholics in the north of Ireland are treated not dissimilarly to how Palestinians are treated in Palestine. And so they're being, in the late 60s, they're being burned out of their homes, right? And my father's generation saw the burning of the Ardoin, loyalist gangs backed up by the British Empire, burning Catholics out of their homes in sectarian pogroms, right? That's where the provisional IRA came from. And that's why where I come from, we love the IRA because they defended our communities when we were being burned out of our homes. That's where it came from. It wasn't until 1971 that the IRA first bombed Britain in the Old Bailey bombing. And up until that point, 1969 until January 1972, Irish Republican groups were really struggling to gain a foothold within the Irish Catholic community because there was the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, which was a kind of, you know, a marching, they were engaging in marches, there was a peaceful kind of Gandhi-inspired, MLK-inspired theory of change. And infamously, in January 1972, the British Empire sent in their paratroop regiment and murdered 14 people with machine guns, and after 1972, people flooded into the IRA, okay? So again, with the context, it's a very bloody, painful moment in Irish history, but again, the British state tries to say, you cannot do this, you cannot march for your rights, and if you do, we will murder you in the streets, and it led to a massive increase in support for the Irish physical force tradition, okay? So that's where prescription comes from. It's that they create the problem themselves by trying to violently smash the uppity people who dare to suggest that the world should be different, and then they create their own problem for themselves. There's many other ways in which they create a problem for themselves in the north of Ireland, but we only have so much time, right? I'm pointing out 1972 is a high watermark of that stuff. I mean, 1971 internment without trial is a high watermark in this stuff, right? Just rounding up Catholics and putting them in internment camps without charge or trial. That's the context in which we have to understand the prescription regime. And broadly, it's clear that what they were trying to do is to say, we are effectively fighting a war against an organised army. The Irish Republican Army was one of the most sophisticated national liberation struggles in history. And rather than treating them like an army, what Thatcher's government and other governments were trying to do was to say, you're just criminals, you're just common criminals, you're not an army. And then Bobby Sands, of course, in 1981, disproved her in the most astonishing way. At the age of 27, went on hunger strike, and before dying, succeeded in winning election to the British colonial parliament, and just ran a coach and horses through Thatcher's claim that they didn't have the popular support of the Catholic community. So that's where the precursor legislation comes from. It's this attempt. Bobby Sands was in prison for membership of a prescribed organisation. Now, I think it's tricky because Palestine Action aren't like the IRA. Their theory of change is fundamentally different, right? But there are similarities that we can think through together. All I would say is that it seems to me that the British state has messed up yet again in its crisis. Its little loyal Jewish Ulster is collapsing, and in its crisis, it's like, maybe we should make these guys illegal. Like, they're so effective. What if we just made them a terrorist organization and make it illegal to be a member, and make it illegal to express support? And I'm here to suggest that if we make it so, the Liam Ogue effect is going to kick in, the 1972 Bloody Sunday effect is going to kick in, the Suella Braverman trying to say you can't march effect is going to kick in. If the British state, the British Empire that is complicit in its empire, tries to push you around and tell you you're not allowed to follow their example, if you express support for them, we'll put you in prison. The solution to that is to spit in their face and do it anyway. Direct action all the way. That 1,000 Palestine actions through. That's the solution. Make it ungovernable. Make it completely unenforceable. And as Scott had said, even if you can't be a member of the organization or express support for it because you're worried about the criminal consequences, you can still take direct action. They cannot outlaw that. It's obviously the criminal offences are what they are, and you go into it with your eyes open and you take your own risks. But broadly speaking, we must not allow them to stop taking direct action, and they're not